going to go through a couple of different ways of making a character and character controls. One of them is a more conventional way of doing things, where I've drawn frame by frame an animation of a particular character. What I'll do is I'll create a new composition here. Let's have a look. Just put in some standard 16:9 settings, and I'll import my frames. What I've got is this boxer here. Now I'm going to make my composition frame rate 20 frames per second, just because this is the way I've animated this particular boxer. I can change the way it interprets the frames. Normally it comes in at 30 frames per second when you bring in footage into After Effects, so you've got to be careful when you bring in any new footage to make sure that you're bringing it in at the appropriate frame rate. And I'm going to make a couple of adjustments to this later where I'm bringing things in at different frame rates, but I'll explain the reason for that. This composition I'm doing at 20 frames per second, and I want the boxer to be at the same frame rate, so I'm going to go to interpret footage, where you just click on the boxer, right click, go to interpret footage and main, and I'm just going to go in here and change it to 20 frames per second. And the way I just changed the comp settings was just I just selected the comp, press Control K, and I can also change the frame rate in here, as well as the width and height and a few other things, and the duration. In fact, I'm going to just change that duration to 10 seconds. So I've got things set up here. I'm going to pop my boxer in here. He's quite a big size. So what will happen with this guy is, when I run through his frames, you'll see he does a punch. And I'm just going to increase his timeline here, because his clip will come to an end, because it's only it's not very long. It's only sort of half a second. So I'm going to select the timeline, press Control Alt and T, and that'll bring up time remap, and then it just means that I can just increase the timeline there, so he can just do a punch and he'll go back to his normal self. So if I incidentally wanted to make him do another punch later on, oops, it's not exactly the same. In fact, I won't do that. Let's have a look. Let's just change a couple of things here. Yeah. So if I wanted him to do another punch later on, if I copy this key here and paste it in there, it'll hold that particular time, sort of like it's almost like creating a pause, because the 2 points here in the time remap, it creates 2 default points. I'll just take this key away. It makes 2 default points, which was the original duration of the clip. So if I delete this and I undo that, you'll see these 2 keys here represent the start and the end of the original clip. And what essentially it does is it means I can extend the clip for longer, so it still stays on the screen, but it gives me a bit of control over how that time's interpreted by being able to add keys. So if I want this particular section of time, I can copy this key and I can paste it a bit further on down the line. And then if I want to keep this, and this means it'll hold this frame basically, because this key here represents this frame in the sequence. And if I want to run the sequence again, I can copy these keys and I can copy these keys and just paste them here, and it'll run that sequence again. So it'll run through the sequence there. I've paused it because I've copied this key from here to there. So this is the same point in time, it's being copied, and because there's nothing happening between those 2 points, it stays still. And then I can paste these keys in again, where it runs from the start to the finish, and it'll run from start to finish there and there. And I can slow it down as well. If I just move this key along, it'll still do the start to the finish, but because it's over a longer duration, it'll do a much slower punch. So that's how the time remap works. So I've got him doing a punch there and a punch there. I'm just going to move these along a little bit. So that's a brief introduction to time remap, and that's an important thing for this particular session. So I've got this character here, and he's animated in a kind of traditional way. He's been drawn frame by frame, and it took quite a long time to do. He's pretty basic, but it took a while. And the thing about After Effects and a lot of programs is if you cut things up into different layers, and you separate up sort of lower and upper arm pieces and separate the limbs out, and you parent them in a certain way, it means you can create a character that you can control, but you can do it relatively quickly because you're not having to draw them frame by frame. So I'll demonstrate this in the next bit. So I've got this guy here in his traditional animation style, and I'll bring in the same guy but broken up into different bits. So I'm going to grab his head, parts of his arms, his legs. Let's have a look and get everything in there. Don't want that for the time being. I think I've got everything. Nearly everything anyway. So I'll import these bits in and just drag them into the scene. Now, what I can do is I'll bring in his torso and his glove. Let's just grab that torso from somewhere. There he is. Okay. Just drop these in there as well. So I can reassemble this guy. What I'm going to do first though, before I reassemble him, is I'm going to create a new null layer, and I'm going to rename it Boxer. Now the reason for doing this is because I want something that's going to have overall control over the entire rig, and having a null is a very good way of doing that, because you can add properties and effects to a null, expression controls and things like this, which I'll use later, and you can parent everything to the null, but the null doesn't show up in the comp. You can't see it, but it gives you a level of control, and I'll show you how that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set things up and parent things just like you would with a normal rig. So for instance, we've got it's going to have to rearrange a few things here. I'm going to parent the head to the torso, and I can do this by clicking on the pick whip and dragging it over torso. I'm also going to parent the upper left arm to the torso as well, the lower arm to the torso, no, the lower arm to the upper arm, and I'm going to put the leg, we need the right arm in there as well to the torso. We also need the legs in there as well. I'm going to parent all those to the torso, so when I move the torso around, oh, we've still got a glove in there. I'm going to grab that glove, and that will go on the left lower arm. So when I grab this torso and move everything out around, everything's parented, but everything's parented in a way that's a natural hierarchy. The glove is connected to the lower arm is connected to the upper arm is connected to the torso, and so on. And finally, I'm going to take the torso, I'm going to connect that to the null. So now when I move the null around, everything else moves around with it. So now I'm going to rearrange a few things. I'm going to grab this, grab the torso, I'm going to change its Y position and move that down to there. I'm going to take the glove, sorry, not the Y position. What I did just there was I moved this pivot there, the pivot of that particular layer, and I do that by pressing Y and moving the pivot around. So holding down Y and clicking on the pivot allows you to move it, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pivot all, or move the pivots on all of these parts. so that they're in a natural position. Let's have a look. I'm going to just start to assemble things here. Let's get the upper arm in there. And you can see already that the way this is set up, whenever I move, so if I move the upper arm, oops, when I move the upper arm, everything follows with it. If I move the lower arm, the glove follows with it. So you can see how that hierarchy is working. Let's take a leg. Going to move the pivot on this one as well. And take the leg and move the pivot on that. And so slowly we're going to start to build up this character. Where is that pivot gone? There it is. Okay, so now I'm going to set it up so that I'm going to move the torso down underneath the arms in the layers so that things are in the right, arranged in the right order, because otherwise if I don't rearrange these layers it's going to look a little weird if an arm is sticking up somewhere over the torso. Say if this arm wasn't, if it's in the layer above the torso for instance, it's going to look a bit weird. So I'm just rearranging a few of these bits and pieces here. I'm just going to grab the torso, move that up and get these legs in the right place. Let's just put these legs together. Okay, and just pop it there. Now the reason I put this under one null is now you can see that he's facing, well, he's big and he's also facing in the wrong direction, and so I can just grab the null and scale the null rather than have to scale either all the character parts down or the torso. And the other thing for the reason for this is if it's flipped the wrong way, I can take the transform, I can take the scale and I can flip the scale on this and relock it. So I just flipped the x-axis and now he's flipped the right way. So that's now minus 70%, and now he's flipped the other way, so now the two guys can face off against each other. So this guy on the right is animated using the traditional method, and the guy on the left is just using like a forward kinematic system, a system where I can just the parent moves the child moves the one underneath that. So if I want to get this guy to punch, what I can do is just take his left arm, just going to keep position and rotation, and I'm going to move that to there. So straighten his arm out, and that's, oh actually I started moving the wrong hand. Let's get this lower arm keyed as well. Rotation position, I'm just going to rotate that up. Oh, he's blocking. Oh, there you go. Right, so punch, punch. But as you can see, when I do this, the guy on the right hand side is moving a bit more dynamically because I've animated every single frame. I've got him turning into the punch, I've got his knee bending, whereas this guy is pretty static. I can't really do much here because I don't have a way of rotating his torso in order to pull his shoulder forward, even if I've got poppet pins, which I can use on the legs for instance, and I'll just do a quick demonstration of that. Let me just take a poppet pin and just pop those in there. So even if I wanted to, say, bend the leg a little bit, just put the knee in there for instance. Just grab that. Just grab these keys. So even if I wanted to put a little bit of bend in the knee and stuff, that's fine. If I wanted to do that for this, for the knees, I can sort of deform them in that way. If I could just pop a couple of puppet pins in here as well. Let's have a look. Do, do. Thing to remember about puppet pins, which I always forget, is that it'll key it on the frame. Automatically it keys all your puppet pin keys on the frame that you created them, which I keep forgetting. So there we go. Let's have a look. So if I want to move his, let's say I want to move his knee a bit so he leans a bit further into it with a punch, I can, you know, I can move these around. See, that looks a bit odd. Let's go back to this guy's puppet pins. Yeah, let's move this one back a bit. Okay. So it's alright, it's not very convincing. He's kind of moving his knees around and his body is static. So, but there are a couple of things that we can do. The thing is, the guy on the left, he's going to be a lot easier and quicker to animate than the guy on the right. What you can do is you can come to a compromise whereby you can take certain parts of characters that you know are going to twist and turn and change their perspective, and you can create a little bit of footage just for that particular part. So for this boxer character, what I've done is I've made a torso for him that has 3 or 4 frames, and I've also made a glove, because when this guy on the right punches, his fist turns and obviously the glove changes shape, and also his back twists towards the viewer as well. So I've done that for these parts as well. So let's have a look. I'm going to take a torso, I'm going to take a piece of footage for the glove, and I'm also going to take a piece of footage for the torso which has a twist in, and I'm going to add a control to the null, and it'll just give me a little bit of it'll give the character a much better effect, close to this one, not exactly the same, but close enough. So let's have a look. Now then, if I go to, I'm going to import the glove sequence, and it should bring it in as a PNG sequence, and I've got 4 frames there, and I'm also going to bring in a torso sequence as well. And I'm going to change these because this one has got torso's got 3 frames, and I'm going to change that to 3 frames per second. And I'm going to change the glove, because it's got 4 frames, to 4 frames per second. And then what I'm going to do is bring this torso in to here. Now I do remember I'm going to parent it underneath the boxer null object by using the pick whip. And I'm also going to have to change its transforms. Notice the transforms changed here. Suddenly it went from being 100% to 142.9 or whatever. The reason it's done that is because the null is at 70%, and this was at 100%, and what it's done is it's readjusted. Now this is nearly 1.5 times larger compared to the null that it's parented to. If I change this to 100, it'll change back to there. And what it's also done is, because I changed the null round, and the null has got a minus of -100 in the x-axis, I need to make sure this just goes back to being, it tried to adjust to that, and I can just change it to 100%, turn the link back on, and that'll be the right size, because it's using the local coordinates. It's treating the null, the boxer null, as its main coordinates. And I'm going to move this into position there. I'm going to take all the things that were parented to the torso. Let's have left arm upper, left arm lower, and I'm going to parent them to the other torso, my new torso sequence. So here we have everything painted up, so it should mean that if I delete the old torso, everything should still be in place. Now, at the moment, it'll look a bit odd. My torso sequence lasts for a second and it sort of twists around and it's a bit awkward. What I can do is, I want to have a level of control over this torso. I want to be able to put a time slider on it so that this twist, which you can't really see here because it's underneath the arm, if I turn the right arm, if I turn the left arm off, you'll see that I've got this torso that twists around. I want to have some control over this twist, and what I can do is I can add a controller to this null, the boxer null, and I can link it to this sequence. The way I do that is I select the torso layer, I go to layer and go to pre-compose, and then I'll move all attributes onto the new composition, adjust the composition duration to the time span of selected layers. That's very useful because my torso composition is a second long. If I've got a main composition that's 3 minutes long, I don't really want to be messing around with something that I've got a second of torso animation that's stuck in a timeline that's 3 minutes long. So it'll just adjust its new comp, create an entirely new comp, and it'll make it a second long because it'll match it to the duration of that torso animation, which is a second long, and it'll also open a new composition. So I'm just going to click OK there. Then what it's done is it's created a new comp, and it's just got the torso in by itself. If I go back to my old comp, that's remained the same, and everything's still parented to it. So if I select it, you'll see that everything's selected just the same. Let's just check. Yeah, that's right. The thing though that's happened is with this torso, you'll notice that originally the torso had a size, a kind of bounding box size with these controllers in the corner which just surrounded the torso. It's actually created a full screen size one now because the torso is that new comp. It's taking this size into account, the entire composition size, and that's why that suddenly got so big. Now if I go in here and just look at the torso, what I'll do actually is I'll leave this one, but I'll make a change when I bring in the glove so you can see the difference. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my main comp, click on boxer, and then I'm going to go and create a slider control for it, and it'll immediately appear in effect controls. So just double clicked on there, and in here we've got a slider control, and it'll also appear in the main timeline under effects. I can rename this, and I'm going to select rename. I'll right click on it and rename. I'm going to call this torso slider and OK that. So now I've got a slider set up on my main controller here. I'm going to go back down to torso. I'm going to hit Control Alt and T and create a time remap just as I did before, but I'm going to create an expression on it, and I'm going to hold down Alt and click on the stopwatch, and in here I want it to loop, and I'll show you why in a second. So I'm just going to type in loop out, open and close brackets, and click anywhere else. What that'll do is it just loops that section, or it'll loop that section of keys, so it'll start turning over and over. What I can then do is go back to the boxer null, back to where the effect controls are and where I've got the slider, go back down to this expression, and you'll notice the expression on the torso has got a pick whip. Just click on that, drag it over to the slider, and then what that means is when I move the slider, it has a control over that torso, and the torso turns. However, it does turn within about I've got 0 to 100 and it turns within 1 there, and that, I think that pretty much indicates 1 second 1 second of time. So the slider value of 1 is equivalent to 1 second of the torso turning, so it means it turns very, very quickly. What I can do though is I can go into the expression and go to the end of it, just dragging down, and you'll get to the end. Put in the / and then divide by and 100. And that means when I go back up to this torso time slider, clicking on boxer null, when I turn it almost through the full 100, it turns all the way around like that, so it doesn't turn quite so quickly. And this goes back to when I brought this original torso footage in. I made it, because it's 3 frames long, and I made it 3 frames per second. If the time slider is going from 0 to 100, or the slider goes from 0 to 100 there, that basically means it interprets a second as 0 to 100, or it interprets the second of these 2 keyframes as 0 to 100. So it means that, or it's tricky, 0 to 1 is a full second of animation, and so it means when I was clicking on this and dragging and it was getting to 1, it was running out of that full second. So I need to divide it by 100 in order to be able to make the slider be able to slide all the way from 0 to 100. I hope that makes sense, but it works anyway, which makes it a lot easier. That means that now with this sequence, I can now key this slider. So if I take this boxer control null and I can key the slider here, and then I can go to the end of where the punch is, and then I can drag the slider, it'll auto key, and I can have him turn all the way across like that, which looks weird until you take the upper arm again and you drag that across to there. And let's just check it's registered a key. Gonna just move that to there so it's in the right place. So now you'll see the body turning and the arm moving with it, because I'm keying that arm coming across. I'll also have to do things like move the head as well. So let's just grab the head, take position, and grab the head and just move that over as well. In fact, the head could do with being below the torso. So let's just grab that, move it below. So, oh, no, it won't. Looks weird. Let's just leave it where it is. So now the head moves as well. It moves a little too quick at the start. So just make a couple of adjustments. Let's have a look. And the other part I'll have to do is I'll have to move the other arm as well. So look, the right arm, and bring that right arm back. So everything, once I've done that, 2, 3, once I've done that and brought everything back, what should start to happen is I get a twist in the body as it hits. These still look a bit weird, but you see the general idea now. The torso twists with the body. I still have to use the forward kind of kinematic system of rotating the upper and lower arm and things, but by just using a little bit of animation, a 3-frame animation there as I move the slider across, I can get a bit of motion, a bit more form into this character that matches more like this one, without having to draw tons and tons of individual frames. So I'm going to try, the other thing I've got is what I want to do is, if I just grab this null, I'm just going to move the character back a bit. So look, in fact, I'm just going to grab that and I'm going to parent it to the boxer null because I hadn't done that yet. Now I can grab him. I'm just going to bring him back a bit. So you can see, so I want this glove to turn as well. I'm going to delete that glove, and I'm going to bring in my glove sequence, which I brought in there, 4 frames per second because it's 4 frames, and because I want to use it with a time slider, with a slider control. I'm going to go back to the boxer null, and I'm going to add another slider controller to it. I'm going to rename that to glove slider. I'm going to repeat the same thing. So let's just bring in that glove sequence. So let's go back to here. Okay, so I have my glove here. I'm going to parent it underneath the boxer null by using the pick whip. To get it the right size, I just need to reset this to 100% in both axes, and that should do the job. Turn the link back on again, and I'm going to go to layer and pre-compose, move all attributes, just composition duration, just as before, and here it is. The thing that I'm going to do with this though, as you notice from the last one, if I go back to the comp with this glove, if I click on glove, you'll notice that it's huge because it's a whole comp. It's not just that PNG sequence anymore, it's a whole comp that's been brought in there and replaced that particular PNG. So if I go back into here, I just need to select the glove, and it'll tell me how big it is, 191 by 178. If I go Control K now and change this, turn off lock aspect ratio, because otherwise I won't be able to change these units independently. I'm going to change that to 191 wide by 178 tall, and there you'll see the glove sits nicely in there in the comp. And if I go back to comp 1, you see the comp is much smaller now. And I'm going to press Y, and I'm going to move the pivot to the glove there, to the bottom of the glove, and I'm just going to arrange it so it sits over the top of the left arm lower in there. And now I can rotate this glove around to there. Okay, so now what should happen is I'm going to parent it to that lower arm, and now when it turns, you'll see that it follows the arm. Now all I need to do is connect it to a slider so that turn happens at the right time. So I'm going to go back to the glove, back to the boxer null, select the glove, Control Alt and T. I'm just going to create a loop by pressing Alt and clicking on the stopwatch. I'm going to put loop out, open, close brackets, click anywhere else, and then I'm going to go back to the boxer, go to the effects control, and there's my glove slider already set up, and I'm going to grab that pick whip and drag it over the glove slider. And now what that means is the glove slider is controlling that glove. It will stay in the same place because I haven't moved the glove slider. So I'm going to click on that, key the slider, and now I'm going to move to the end of the sequence there. I'm going to turn the glove, and you'll notice when I turn it, it disappears, and that's because I haven't made that change by dividing the sequence, doing the little change to the expression. So if I go down here, I'm going to divide by 100, and now if I go back up to the boxer again and I turn, now I can use that full distance. It will disappear at the end, but I can use the full distance there. Let's just check and see if it's actually keyed. Yes, it has. So now when I move the time slider, you can see it moves the arm, and it twists the torso, and it twists the glove. And it means that the whole animation for this character is going to be far less labor intensive than for this character on the right. But it still has some features of the character in the right, in that the torso turns and the glove turns, which gives it this sort of extra dimension, literally an extra dimension. His head looks a bit weird. I've really not done that right. But it does give it that extra dimension, and it means that if, for instance, I have this guy being hit in the face, it's going to be far quicker just to knock his head back and maybe rotate his torso and move his arms a little bit, than it will be to redraw every single frame of this character and try and get the same effect. There are some compromises. You won't get things like foreshortening like the arm in here. You might be able to if you take the same approach with the arms, for instance, but if you start going down that route and trying to do sequences like I've done for the torso and the glove for every part of the body, you may as well just animate it like this. But by doing a compromise between the two, it means you can get something that's easy to control, quick to animate, and still has a good level of a three-dimensional form. And that's it for this session.